Hi and welcome to this episode of Studio Tech. Now I am sitting here surrounded by a whole load of great stuff. I have got the Nikon D800, the great new DSLR from Nikon that gives clean HDMI out. I've got a Canon XA10 that we use. We actually have the HF-G10s in the studio as our main cameras, which is really the same camera but without the XLRs and a couple of other fancy little bits and pieces. I've got the Atomos Samurai here, which is a SDI field recorder. But I'm not going to talk about any of those things today, though we will talk about those in the near future on other episodes of Studio Tech and Studio Tech Live. What I'm going to talk about is something a little bit boring in some ways, but is so important. And that is how you connect all these bits of equipment together. And we use a whole lot of things called MIDI converters from Blackmagic Design. And we're going to look at a couple of those and the new one that they have just brought out. But why do we need to convert things? Well, if you are using professional equipment, things like the television studio or the ATM-1, for instance, I have the ATM-1 here from our studio. This one does in fact have HDMI inputs, but it also has SDI inputs. And on the output side here, it has various outputs, most of which are SDI, though it does have some HDMI as well. And if you're using equipment such as the NewTek TriCaster, the inputs to the TriCaster are either SDI or they are component. So a lot of equipment does have component output, but you have to run, the three cables, etc. for it, and it really isn't very satisfactory. So most people use SDI, or Serial Digital Interface, which is a high-speed sort of 3 gigabit interface used on professional cameras. Now, if you're using something like the Canon XA10, or I said the HF-G10s that we use in the studio, they don't have that SDI output. What they have is an HDMI output, and you need to be able to convert from HDMI to SDI. And that's the same with cameras such as the new Nikon D800 that has an SDI output. So if we want to connect this to our TriCaster or to our Blackmagic ATM-1 or our television studio, we need to convert it. So here in the studio, we use a lot of mini converters, primarily from Blackmagic, and this is one of them here that we have been using in the studio, and I'll give you a close-up of it. So here it is, and this one, as you can see, is HDMI to SDI. Basically, you just plug in your HDMI on one side, and then on the other side it gives you two SDI. And the SDI is a BNC connector. It's a 75 ohm coaxial connection, and it actually gives you two outputs, and then you can run that to your TriCaster or ATEM-1, etc. Now, one of the other advantages of switching to SDI is the length of the cables you can run. If you are running HDMI, which we do here in the studio, you can run it 10 meters you can normally get away with, 15 meters is a push. And even in this studio, which is the longest cable length we've got is about 10, 12 meters, it sometimes, if you're using cheap cable, it just doesn't work. And then we actually then convert from HDMI to SDI in our rack. Now, one of the disadvantages of doing it in the rack is that these actually get very, very warm. They actually get hot, almost too hot to touch. So what we are going to do when we next rewire the studio is we're actually going to mount these converters by each camera, and then you can then we'll just run it as an SDI cable. Now the SDI cable you can run usually up to about 300 feet without needing a booster on the cable. Some people have run them further than that. Some people have problems with being short. But 300 feet, 100 yards, as opposed to 10, 15 yards meters is it's a big difference. And even in a fairly small studio, you'd be surprised how long a cable length you can get by the time you've gone up from the camera, gone to your grid or around the side of the room and down, etc. So it can be a long way. So we We have about 7 or 8 of these here in the studio, all feeding into our NewTek TriCast TCXD 850, and they work well. It's one of those boxes that really just tends to work, and apart from the fact they get a little bit warm, we have been very pleased with them. Now, if you then decide that you want to do other things with your SDI, like Vance Willis has got a video hub from Blackmagic, which allows you to take your SDI inputs, and then so you can, his is, I think, is 16 inputs and 32 outputs. So you can take one SDI input and actually feed it to all 32 outputs, or to 4 of them, or to 1 of them. So it makes routing things very easy in the studio, and you can adjust things very quickly. But what you might need to do at some point is to take the SDI signal that comes out of your TriCast or out of your video hub, out of your ATEM1, and display it on a normal monitor. An HDMI monitor, which is normal TV, etc., which doesn't have SDI input. Now, we would love to have broadcast professional SDI monitors here in the studio, but they are just out of our price range. They are £2,000, £3,000, £4,000 upwards, and we would much rather use a normal monitor and put another converter on it. And you can get a version of this converter which, instead of being HDMI to SDI, is SDI to HDMI. Now, we haven't used any of those yet, but we are now, because we have just received from Blackmagic this brand new in its box converter, which is this was released at NAB, and it's a battery converter. It runs off batteries or off of a power adapter, and this one you can see is SDI to HDMI. So this allows you to take a signal that is SDI from your switcher or from your video hub, and display it onto a standard monitor. Well, I have got next to me a LG 47-inch HDMI monitor, and I happen to have an SDI video source which comes from the Atomos Samurai, and we're going to unpack the battery converter, feed it with the SDI source, and plug it into the monitor and see how we get on. There we go. The normal welcome to Blackmagic card. Now we'll open it up, and we have a power supply. They're very good with their power supplies. They have different types of plug connectors on them. So here we go. Here are all the plug connectors. Here is the UK connector. No emails about why is it so big and thick. I get fed up with answering that question. They just works very well. So we slide that on to there. So there's our power adapter already. And then here is the battery mini converter. It's very solid, very heavy. I think it's made out of aluminium. It has a switch on the side, which I assume switches the battery on, as opposed to using it from mains. It has the HDMI output connector in this case there, and the power input on that side, and on this side it has a USB connector here. That's for doing updates to the firmware, and then it has SDI input and an SDI loop, so you can loop through it. And it is pretty substantial compared to the old converter. It is much heavier, and I wouldn't say it was twice the weight, but significantly heavier. It does actually have rubber on it, so, and you can see size-wise, it's just sort of a similar. Sorry, that moved it the wrong way on the camera. Similar sort of size. So, all right, I've got it all connected up now. Literally have just plugged in the power supply. The batteries aren't charged at the moment, I don't think. Plugged in the SDI input. That's coming from our Atomos Samurai, which is just here. It's our field recorder, as we used at NAB. I'm going to press play on the Samurai, and we've just got an HDMI cable plugged in to the battery converter. And if we look at the monitor, you can see here that we actually have a pretty good picture, and it just worked. I haven't had to fiddle with anything. There's no adjustments at all. It is just working, and so far it is cool. It's only been on a minute, but we will keep an eye on how warm it gets. I assume that as it is battery powered, it will be it won't generate so much heat. It'll probably be a lot more efficient. They say that you can use the battery for, I think it's 1 to 2 hours, which if you're out in the field with something like the Samurai and you wanted to plug it into a monitor in your hotel room or a client's monitor, etc., you can get away with just using the battery power for an hour or two. It is very nice. It's not getting warm at all. So there it is, a battery converter, the new battery converter from Blackmagic Design. They do SDI to HDMI and HDMI to SDI in this new version. In the older version, they also do SDI to RGB, to analog, and they have versions that split out audio, etc. So there's a whole range of them from Blackmagic. Price-wise, they are very similar in pricing. In fact, the converters have come down in price over the last year, which is pretty good. And we look forward to seeing how this works in the next few months. Certainly, if the heat output is reduced, that will be a big bonus. And having one of those, or a couple of these, an SDI to HDMI and an HDMI to SDI in the kit bag, will be pretty good. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that quick look at these converters. Converters are something that, as soon as you start, moving up from using 1 or 2 cameras with things like Wirecast, you're really going to have to look at, because the X8, as I said, doesn't have the SDI output. If you get the first version in the Canon range that does have SDI output is the XF105, but that is almost twice the price of this. I think these are in the UK about £1,600, so I guess a couple of $1,000, whereas the XF105 I think is about £2,900, £3,000. So what's that, $4,500? So you can see that getting one of these and a mini converter is a much better bet, especially if you're in the studio and you can just wire these in and forget about them. So that's it. Hope you've enjoyed it. Be more episodes of Studio Tech coming soon, where we'll be looking at the Nikon D800, getting some great results in our testing with this, and we'll also look at the Atomos Samurai. This is an absolutely fantastic device. We used it at NAB with great success. Atomos are actually bringing out some of their own converters that actually slot onto the back, but they're not available yet. When they are, we'll look at them. But in the meantime, check out the Blackmagic website. Do check out all our other videos at studiotech.tv. Bye for now.